Hey everyone, we're on period 3, Shaping a New Republic, part 2. This is lesson 3.10.2. And by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain both how and why political ideas, institutions, and party systems developed and changed in the new republic. So we're going to start off and we're going to take a look at precedents. Precedents are unofficial traditions that were started in the early presidency and they were continued on to today through future presidents. As our first president, George Washington established a number of important precedents on how the office of the president would operate. One of the first things Washington believed was that executive power should be collaborative and not necessarily resting in the hands of a single individual. He, coming out of the military, knew about the importance of conferencing and collaborating with his peers. So Washington asked Congress to create the executive departments to help him facilitate his job in different policy areas. The State Department handles diplomatic affairs. The Treasury Department handles the nation's finances. The Department of War handles the nation's military, and the Department of Justice oversees law enforcement in the country. Each of these executive departments was headed by a cabinet secretary, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of War, and then the Attorney General. Collectively, these secretaries are known as the presidential cabinet, and this is the group of individuals and advisors Washington met with when deciding how to implement policy. He would listen to their opinions, listen to their debate, but ultimately he made the final decision advised by these men. The other tradition that Washington started is called the Inaugural Address. And when Washington assumed the presidency and won the very first presidential election, he was sworn in and then he gave a speech to the people in New York outlining his goals for the presidency. He did that again when he won his second term. And today, all future presidents at their inauguration do give inaugural addresses where they outline the goals for the country and for their government. Finally, when it came to terms, the Constitution had no limit for the terms a president could serve. It just said they had to undergo re-election every 4 years. Washington felt anything more than 2 terms would lead to the presidency becoming a monarchy and perhaps tyrannical under the guide of the wrong person. So presidential terms, while not constitutionally limited to 2 years until much later, were generally that tradition was followed by future presidents. During the Adams administration, John Adams became America's second president, and he had to deal with a conflict in France called the Quasi-War between the United States and the French over shipping. The French military was attacking our ships and we were retaliating to protect them. What the Quasi-War showed was that President Adams was able to carry out some military functions as commander-in-chief without a formal declaration of war. It's called a quasi-war because it means a sort of war. Congress never fully declared war against France. The other tradition that Adams established came at the end of his term when he lost re-election to Thomas Jefferson. Adams was seeking a second term. The voters voted him out of power. And at that point, Adams decided to voluntarily and peacefully hand over his power to Thomas Jefferson. He established that the precedent that presidents who lose re-election don't try to hang on to their position. They will give it to the opposition if they win. So the reason why Adams had to do that was the first political parties had formed in the United States by the time he became president. So let's take a look at what's called the first party system in the U.S. And the Constitution itself does not have anything in it about political parties. The framers were aware that political parties existed in Britain. They found them dangerous and divisive among the population, and so they didn't want political parties to reemerge in the United States. They wanted to create unity. During Washington's administration, it was officially nonpartisan. Washington never joined a political party. But if you remember, there were certain foreign policy incidents, such as Jay's Treaty with Britain and the Neutrality Proclamation, that divided Washington's cabinet between Hamilton and Jefferson. And that's going to be the seed that's going to grow into political parties. The first political party in the United States was the Federalist Party, and it was organized and led by Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton knew if he wanted to get his plans passed, he needed an organized group of people to follow his lead. So a political party became necessary. He took the name Federalist Party from those group of individuals who supported ratification of the Constitution. He was trying to create a link between that event and his party. Federalists support a strong central government in the United States and favored national power over states. Foreign relations under the Federalist Party included developing a stronger relationship with Great Britain. Hamilton felt that America's economic future depended on trade with Britain, and we needed to maintain a positive relationship with them, or our country was going to suffer economically. The Federalists were strongest in the areas of New York and New England, where commerce and trade were the greatest. So they were generally a northern party for the United States, and their supporters were part of the political and commercial elite of those areas. It was wealthy businessmen and entrepreneurs, bankers, merchants who profited off of trade with Britain. They were the ones that supported Hamilton's Federalist. The Democratic Republican Party, as it was officially called, or more commonly called the Republican Party, was founded in response to Hamilton's Federalist Party by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who felt that they needed their own organization to counter Hamilton's organization. The Republican Party views the government of the states as primary, and they said that the federal government needs to be limited in its scope to protect individual rights, and that the state government should be sovereign because they're closer to the people. Foreign policy-wise, as you can imagine, Jefferson and Madison supported France in international affairs, seeing the United States and France as linked sister nations. The Republicans were strongest in the western United States, the Northwest Territory, and in the southern states. And their supporters tended to be working class labor, people that didn't own businesses but worked for business owners, small farmers, and planters in the South. It was much more of an agricultural party. When Hamilton put forward his economic policy for the United States, it had a very Federalist tone to it as Secretary of State. He wanted the U.S. to become a commercial nation, one of shipping and trade and manufacturing similar to Britain. And to accomplish this, his plan had two key parts. One, he asked Congress to create a Bank of the United States, which would collect revenue for the federal government, taxes and tariffs, and then it would issue loans to people in commercial sectors, business people, people looking to become entrepreneurs, to grow that commercial and trading side of the United States. He also said that the United States faced a debt problem because the individual states had accumulated debts during the American Revolution to their citizens and to foreign countries, as well as the Second Continental Congress. And Hamilton said, nobody's going to give us credit. Nobody's going to loan us money if we're not paying back the money we were already loaned. Some of the states had paid their money back and they had paid their debts. Other states had not. So Hamilton said that the national government needs to assume responsibility for the state debts, and the national government needs to pay it off and make sure that it's paid, because that is where we're going to need our credit with other nations and with our own citizens. So we will have the central government assume responsibility for state debt. Jefferson and the Republicans strongly opposed Hamilton's plan for several reasons. One, the Republican vision for America was farming and westward expansion. Jefferson saw the future of this country in the hands of small farmers growing food to sustain themselves, making us independent for Europe. So the Bank of the United States and the funding of the debt would just benefit the commercial business interest, which he said was not where our future lie. He also said it wasn't fair to assume state debts because a lot of southern states, like his home state of Virginia, had paid their debts. So now Hamilton wants the national government to say, oh, you paid your debts, you get nothing. New York, you haven't paid your debts, we're going to pay them for you. He felt like the assumption of state debts was there to benefit Hamilton, who was from New York, and his friends in the business elite. So Jefferson blocked Hamilton's plan in Congress with his political party, and so the two eventually had to come to compromise, and they sat down and they reached an agreement about the party. Jefferson's part of the compromise was this. He agreed to approve Hamilton's plan for the bank and for the state debts, which was crucial to the national economy. Hamilton's compromise was an agreement to move the national capital out of New York City and to an area in the South, which would be called the District of Columbia. Today it's Washington, D.C., and it sits between the southern states of Maryland and Virginia. Jefferson felt more comfortable with the national capital being away from the commercial interest, so it could be under the watchful eye of the Southern farmers. Finally, we see a debate over liberty and order versus individual rights between the two parties. Two very important roles the government has to do. It has to protect individual citizens from violence, but it also has to protect individual rights. During Adams' administration, the Federalist in Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, and these were stringent federal laws that restricted people's right to speak or to write anything critical of how Adams' government was handling the quasi-war. Effectively, they stifled the First Amendment rights of free speech and free press, and if you violated those, there were fines and jail time. But the Federalists argued that those laws were necessary to keep the country united in a time of crisis. Republicans favored the rights of individual liberty above public order and safety. And Republicans said that those laws were a blatant violation of constitutional principles in the Bill of Rights. Jefferson and Madison secretly authored what were called the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. These were proposals, never enacted, but proposals that the states had the power to negate or void out any federal laws that they felt were unconstitutional, such as the Alien and Sedition Acts. But this battle between liberty and order and individual rights is going to play out throughout American history, all the way up through today with the COVID-19 and individuals' rights to wear masks versus the greater good of the country. Finally, when George Washington leaves office, he issues a letter that Hamilton wrote and he edited, and it's called George Washington's Farewell Address. And this is his final parting shot, his last piece of advice to the nation. And it includes two warnings. One, he said we need to stay out of all foreign affairs, any foreign relations with other countries, and focus exclusively on trade, not on their politics or their wars. That will establish a policy called isolationism, where the United States politically will keep to itself in the early years. Second, he had a strong warning against political parties, did not want them formed in the country, and told the American people if they continue, they will divide the people and choke the government so it's not able to function. Obviously, that one of Washington's warnings was largely ignored. So that's the end of 3.1.2. Keep in mind what you should have picked up from this lesson is how or why political ideas, institutions, and those party systems developed and changed in the new republic. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.